These are some tips to help you get started in Palworld. Alright, so the first thing is actually going to be basically easily sorting your inventory. So when you have a chest and you go through and access that chest, if you have an item that's in your inventory that's actually going to already be present in the chest, all you need to do is press a special button to go through and move the inventory over. So on PlayStation, it's actually just going to be R1. And you'll notice everything that was already present in this chest automatically moved over. And then if I wanted to, I could go through and sort it. Now, another great tip is when you actually sort things, you actually refresh the timer on things that are going to expire. So if you look at this down here, the Mama Rest meat, you'll notice it has basically 7 minutes and 4 seconds left. If I hit the refresh button, you'll now notice it's gone back up to 10. So every time you refresh your inventory, if there's an item you have in your inventory that's going to be sorted, it'll actually go through and refresh that timer. So if you don't have the ability to have something to cool things down yet, for example, like the fridge over here or anything that's cooling, if you just sort your inventory every time you do it, you can't do it when you're just in your inventory. You do have to be accessing something like a storage unit, for example. Even if you just continuously click it like this, you'll continue to go through and actually refresh the spoil timer. Now, another thing as well here is make sure that when you are going through and collecting different things, make sure you constantly level up your effigies here with the Lip Monk effigies, because you can go through and do things like having a Vixie here to harvest up the Pal Balls, as you saw. We've got quite a few in here, 130, 29. I haven't really crafted any of those. Vixie has generated all of them. This is level 3 Vixie. But, just having the Pal Balls, at a certain point, you will need higher tiers to catch higher tier pals. But these effigies will actually provide a pretty significant boost in the ability to actually capture more difficult pals, even at lower levels. So definitely make sure you're doing that. Now, another thing is at a certain point, these pals constantly run around and do their own thing. At a certain point, you're actually going to unlock the ability to basically command them to do what you want, set specific preferences. And this is highly advantageous. So you basically can go through and tell them to work at a normal speed or hard work or super hard work. This will, though, go through and put pressure on them and basically decrease their sanity quicker. So you do need to be careful not to keep this on for too long. Otherwise, they will basically just stop working altogether and basically counteract what you're trying to do. But what you want to do is you want to go through and set work preferences. For example, let's you're on Tombat. So he's basically got the ability to do, the jobs here. I think this is planting I think this might be planting here. But growing, he's got the mining, and then also the transporting here. All I want him to do is to mine. So I just have these two disabled, so the only task he will ever do is mine. So he's either going to go through and basically mine one of 3 things. Either he will go through and mine this specific metal node here that respawns in my base. He will go through and mine this advanced ore, or he can go through and mine the rocks that are over here. Or he might just be lazy hanging out in the bathtub. Look at him. He's having a good time. All right. But if you want to set him to a specific thing, basically you want to minimize him moving back and forth, because sometimes they may just move back and forth. You'll actually want to come back here and fix the work assignment. So if you go down, for example, and we were to look, you'll notice I actually have him set specifically for ore mining site 2. So what that means is instead of him basically traversing back and forth in between the ore node that you see here and then the ore here and the stone over there, he will only mine this. And then while he mines this, people will take what's in there, and there's a chest literally right here next to it. So there's minimal effort in basically transporting the goods to a location. They'll just come over here and they'll store it. And the same thing for the wood here. And they can also put it in that chest. Basically, this minimizes them running back and forth. So whoever's transporting the goods, it makes it very, very efficient. Now you just saw that guy's moving back and forth. So he's probably set to transporting. And I didn't disable it because it looks like he's carrying stuff. So let's go see what he's doing. I probably didn't optimize him to the best of my ability. So if we go back here, take a look at that guy. And let's see. Actually, it's this here. So it looks like, oh yeah, he has everything enabled. So he's actually growing, he's doing handiwork, he's actually lumbering, and he is transporting. So then my first thought is why is he not set to just lumbering? Well, let's go look. If we look at the top, I've actually disabled RSOX for lumbering. Dynasum is just set to plants. Univolt is also lumbering. I actually just want him to charge, but I'm at full charge, so I'm allowing him to lumber in his free time once everything is fully charged up. And then Warsuck is also lumbering. So actually, I have quite a few people set to lumbering. I probably can honestly disable his lumbering and just allow him to work around the rest of the yard, for the simple fact that unless he is charging, he's doing this. So you could have somebody set specifically just to do that job, or you could disable things. I really don't think I need him to grow. Who else do I have growing? Oh yeah, literally this is their only job is to grow. So I'm going to disable that so he doesn't actually go through and waste his time doing that. I do want him to transport stuff though, and this could be a side job. And then handiwork's always helpful if I want to build something and I simply just don't have enough help. I actually have quite a few for handiwork. Pancake was in the breeding area at one point, but yeah, so you want to go through and constantly manage these, and then once you've set specific things, if you really want them to specifically just do one task, I tend to not set them up on workbenches because they'll typically just come over when they have free time. But you can go through and just select where you want to place them. For example, these three specifically are always just at the ranch, so they will never leave this area. So basically, Vixie is constantly generating the pal balls, arrows, and money. I have the honey generation here through the bee guard, and then this cow here is making us some milk. And then this little pal here, Kelpsy, is actually generating the pal fluids here, which we have 500 to 3. And then at one point, I did have a different pal in here generating the flame organs as well. So basically, their only job is to do that, and somebody comes over and they actually transport the stuff here for me. Now, if you are going to build something, though, and everyone else is too busy to actually help you out, a great example would be, let's say if we can build some pal spheres. Where did I put the pal sphere? Right over here. So if, for example, you notice our guy here, they're at 93 capacity, so he's going to keep working. But if we want to generate some spheres here, for example, we can build 50. We'll go through and do that. You notice immediately it says 2 people are going to come help us out, right? And if I do this, it's going to take forever. Well, while we are waiting, what we can actually do is we can actually... So he's going to help us out, right? And this is it's going to slowly work. We could also throw out our Anubis. All 3 of those pals and ourselves are actually going to be able to go through and do this. So it's going to be significantly faster. Now, Anubis is in my party, and the other ones did go through and leave. But at one point, once they're finished with their task, they will come back. So you can actually use the pals in your party to also speed up the process for a certain task by just throwing them near that specific station. Just make sure your stations aren't too close together, or you'll actually go through and have a hard time picking which one they want to do. But for example, in this, even if I stop, he'll continue doing his thing. I could actually walk all the way over here, and he'll still hang out, just keep doing his thing. And then when everybody else is freed up, they will come back and help him. Now, if I wanted them to come help me right away, I could just go through and either pick them up. For example, is he coming over to help? I think he's going to go help. Yeah, but if I want him to stop moving back and forth, I could just literally lift him up and assign him to this task. And now they both will continue to do this until this task is finished. Now, when I did start this, I didn't tell them to actually transport it because I don't want them to go hide this anywhere. I actually want to pick it up manually myself. But when you are crafting something, for example, let's go over here for some ore. I think we have plenty stocked up. When you go to build the ore, you want to make sure once you've selected it that see where it says square and I'm unselecting allow transport by pals. If you do not have that selected, it will just leave that specific item there and the pals will actually not go through and transport that item, meaning they will not go do anything else. They will stop working until the item has been placed in a storage chest. So you need to go through and make sure they're transporting afterwards to allow them to continue freeing up from that job to move on to the next one. So now that we've done that, we've gone through and started it. Now our flame pal over here will actually come through and start burning things for us. All right, now the next thing is actually going to be exploration. So, oh, there's some Vixies here. Let's grab those guys. So there are certain pals. Actually, I set up my base actually here specifically because I know that Vixies spawn here. So I could go through and constantly farm them because I am trying to go through and just have a nice one set up. So I don't have to worry about crafting spears. It's actually not the most ideal way to do it. And much later in the game, you'll probably stop using Vixie. But it's a pretty reliable source in the early in the mid game to obtain some of those higher spheres without actually having to craft them. And then you also get the experience as well. That's something to talk about. So you'll notice here when you catch this Cremis, which is a level 3, watch how much experience I get on the right hand side, if I can catch it. Don't make me punch you. Speaking of that, a great way to get some of these lower level pals, if you don't catch them right away, is actually to use your torch just till you catch them on fire. Because the moment you catch them on fire, you'll notice that the catch rate immediately went up. So even if you don't have a pal that can go through and deal that damage, you can use the fire. Now watch the experience that I get. Oh, actually, I've already caught all 12 of those. There's only 10. I'll have to find somebody else who I don't have. I don't know if I have all 12 of the Sparkets. Let's try these guys. Let me just throw a ball here. It's a back shot. It should be pretty reliable here, so 44%. And you'll notice I get a significant amount of experience. So as you notice, I got 5,910. You don't get that much earlier on. Now the reason for that, someone tell you immediately it's because you haven't caught all 12. But the experience you actually get for catching each pal, it's a linear amount based upon the actual level that you are. So basically you just want to go through, and it is good to catch some of them early on to level up, but you'll probably notice you gain levels like 1 through 12 quite fast, and you don't need to worry about experience. So some of these lower level guys, if you actually save until later, you'll actually be able to get quite a bit of experience just by catching them later on. Even though they're a low level, they give you a pretty good chunk of experience because it is scaled based upon the level that you're in. Now, when it comes to using your map, since we are out here exploring, you'll actually notice my map is very, very cluttered with a whole bunch of stuff. I basically mark not everything, but quite a few landmarks on here. The primary ones being chests, because chests and eggs actually respawn, and they are static spawns, meaning after a certain period of time you can actually return to them, and they will constantly have new loot or respawn, or they have new eggs. So if we look at my map here, it says there should be one, let's see which direction I'm facing here, just to my right, so it's probably right there. So every time I grab this chest, at one point I can return back to this chest and grab it. And so the chest might not have anything crazy in it, a small soul, some training manuals, and some coins, but they also have the chance of having weapon schematics, which are significantly better than what you can actually get by simply just crafting the items that you get out of your actual technology tree. And then later in the game, you get some of the top tier ones that have better keys, and those are better to farm because they just simply give you better loot or pal spheres, etc. Now, another thing I actually mark on here is dungeons, because dungeons actually have a timer. And once you do go through and complete this dungeon, you'll have a timer until you can actually go through and do it again. But entering these dungeons, you can get some rare resources. All right, and then when you do make it to the end of the dungeon here, you can actually go through and capture or defeat the last of the actual pals in here or the actual boss. At the very, very end, you will actually have 2 chests that respawn every single time as well. So this is another great way to go through and farm loot, especially if you ever feel the point where you're stuck. Exploring typically is always the best option. When you're exploring early on, trying to capture pals all throughout the day typically involves quite a bit of battling and can be quite the challenge. But if you kind of hit like maybe level 10 or 15 and it's nighttime, even though there are things like daydreams that will attack you on sight, or I think even the Despressos here, there are other creatures like these guys who actually go to sleep. And because they're asleep, they immediately give you a higher capture rate. It's not amazing, but if you actually sit there and go around them, you can get a back bonus on them. So the moment I throw that ball, it's at 25% instead of being 8% because they're asleep, and I did absolutely nothing. So even without having a battle, when it's nighttime, it actually makes it a little bit easier to go through and capture some of the pals who are typically alive and require you to fight them. And they'll actually just be asleep, making it significantly easier to go through and hit that 12 capture rate to get those extra experiences. And now, finding creatures like this, like the Daydream, a great example is, these are nighttime-only creatures. And the same goes for that Tombat over there. So the only way to get these creatures is either A, while playing and exploring at night, or B, if you actually go into the dungeons or dark places like caves, you will actually find some of these creatures, but they will not be out and about during daytime. So it is important to go through and make sure you're exploring both during the day and at night, so you can have a chance to actually capture all of these different pals. These ones are actually really good too, so pals like the Hoot Crates are great because they actually have a passive ability where they actually influence a specific type, so they actually make everybody else on the party deal 10% more damage. So if you get a couple of these guys with another pal that deals dark damage, that's a pretty good combo early or even into the mid-game. And I've got a pretty high capture rate with this ball here. We'll just try the lower one on this guy. But yeah, basically you can go through and capture these guys and combine them with a dark element. You will be doing some crazy damage early on, especially if they have things like the Muscle Head perk, like they have on I Can Do here, where it does 30% more damage. When you stack all these different buffs up, they really add up and do quite a bit of damage. Now, one last important feature at nighttime, you'll actually see directly across there this giant glowing green ball or orb. But you'll notice that you can basically see these lip monk green effigies from all across the map. Like if I was to just fly as high as I can fly here, it is getting to be kind of daytime here. But if I look around, anything that is glowing, I can see from, like, look, I can see one significantly over there by that tree. They really, really stand out. So if you're hunting for these early on, the best time to do it is at night because you'll actually be able to see them significantly easier. All right, so when you get to the deep water here, it's really important is if you actually throw out your Nightwing, and let's say you're flying above the water and you run out of stam, typically, like in games like Ark, if you're on a flyer and you run out of stam, the moment you actually run out of stam, you'll start to descend and hit the water, and you would get dismounted. In this game, your flyer actually hits the bottom, and it considers the top of the water, regardless of how deep it is, to be a solid surface. So you actually go through and restore your stam, meaning if you're a flyer and you're above the ocean, it's not a big deal. Your flyer will make it all the way across the ocean, even if you're just doing this, because it requires 0 stam to fly directly above the water. But the moment you ascend, it actually uses some. Speaking of which, if you'll notice when we go down to the bottom here, if we just ascend, all we do is we hold the X button on PlayStation and we ascend. I'm using very, very little stam. Now if I stop, and I go forward, I'm using very, very little stam. Now, if I try to do both, if I go forward and I ascend at the same time, I'm using twice as much stam. So if you're trying to go through and get to like a really high cliff, for example, don't try to do both. Just ascend first and then go through and push yourself forward. You'll typically be able to reach a lot more places early on when stam is so limited due to that factor that it takes so much to be able to go both directions at the same time. Now, Nightwing is a pure flyer, but what happens if you have something who has the ability to both fly and swim? An example would be our dragon buddy here. So if you hop on him, you notice he's actually in the water and it takes stam to swim. Now if he flies into the air and we use all of his stam up, we'll just go through and use that same thing I told you a second ago where I use even more stam doing both. What happens when he hits the water? Well, it's not good, because if he can both fly and he immediately takes damage because he has no stam, because he can't actually go through and swim and fly, and he will immediately take damage. So if you're on a creature that can both fly, I'm going to actually dismount him, and I'm going to pull him away because I don't want him to die. So if you're on a creature that can both swim and fly, and then you land in the water, that's going to be a really bad situation for you, because you will actually die because your creature is basically drowning and no longer has the capability of swimming. And as you saw, I was actually having a difficult time getting up on that ledge as well. So if you are strictly just on a flyer early game, crossing the ocean, you will have zero problems. But for whatever reason, if it's a creature that is hybrid, you have to be very careful you don't put yourself in a difficult situation like that, because your creature could die, and then if you're stranded out in the ocean and you can't swim back, there's a good chance you most likely will die. And if you have the setting turned on where you drop all your stuff, then you're going to go through and drop your stuff in the middle of the ocean, and that can be quite difficult to go through and retrieve at a later point in time. So do just be careful when you're managing your exploration who you choose to actually ride on. I found that typically the water pals are best for traversing water, but a lot of them are really, really slow. So typically flyers that are strictly just flyers are the best for actually crossing the water, because they can basically just float above the water using zero stam. Alright, now we're actually back at the base here. So another thing you can do too is Palworld can actually get a bit grindy at times. So there are certain elements you can go through. You can increase the experience you gain, for example. You can go through and set timers to take less. I would say one of the most commonly changed settings, though, even if everything else left is the same, is incubation settings. There is a parameter which you can change and influence exactly how much the egg sets. For example, I just turned this on to show you the extremity. Instead of a large, huge electric egg taking typically around, I think it's 2 hours, or at least some of them are, it's immediate. So basically, if you like every other part of the game, but you just don't want to wait for your eggs to hatch, this might be a bit overpowered. Again, there's a setting you can go through and adjust it down to simply be 5 or 10 minutes or 15 minutes. It really depends on you and how much time you have to devote to the game. By doing this, for example, you're not actually affecting how much experience you earn from all other sources. But for example, if you didn't want to go through and capture, let's just say, a whole bunch of 12 different pals, hatching eggs also counts towards your catch count. So if we go through and we actually open up this egg, you'll notice on the right-hand side, I now have 10 of 12. So when you do hatch an egg, for example, if you set it to be pretty low and you can hatch them pretty consistently without a large timer, or if you just simply had a lot of egg incubators and you basically had like 10 of them in at a time, you can go through and do that, and hatching eggs will also count towards that catch count. So if you just don't want to go back to certain areas to catch a bunch of small pals, and you'd rather hatch the eggs and just, get lucky when you find them when you're out exploring, that's definitely another possibility. But another thing you can go through and do is if you go over to the breeding area here, I currently don't have anybody assigned to this breeding area. There is just the Pen King in there, but no one else, and so no one's going to breed with him. In here, you'll notice that I have the cakes. You'll notice that in my inventory, the cakes have an expiration timer. The moment you put something in the breeding farm, for example, so the cakes, it's no longer going to expire. Alright, now another thing to actually consider too is your strategic base locations. I will be making a guide in this in the future for some of the best base locations in Palworld. Now, previously, prior to the summer update, it sounds like base locations were significantly more difficult for the simple fact that you needed to look for ore. And the reason for that is this did not exist before. You could not go through and actually generate ore by itself. You actually needed to find nodes to actually go through and harvest. Now, this is no longer needed. But what you don't have is you do not have a station to go through and be able to craft the different Paldium fragments. The only option you can really use is basically turning your stone into Paldium fragments at 5 stone per, which costs quite a bit. But if you go through and you look at things, for example, in Technology Tree, for example, I'm currently working towards trying to build a saddle for my Fengalope, and you'll notice that I actually need 40 Paldium fragments. But if you were in a base area that had quite a few fragments, for example, I think there's actually one just across the way here. You'll notice there's a whole bunch directly behind my base, but they're not in my base, meaning I don't have somebody who will actually go through and automatically harvest these. Now, what you could do, though, if you don't want to build your base around these, let's just say there's not a good location, for example, and you want to go through and harvest these, harvesting these can take quite a bit of time. It's not easy, right? Well, even if you're out and about, your buddy can actually help you. So Anubis is quick at mining, so I can go through and assign him to this while I'll actually attack it too, and will immediately go through and break it. So if I wanted to, I could go through and just use a buddy to look for a resource like Chaldean fragments if I don't want to place them in my base. And while you're out and about, your buddy will actually help you harvest things. Now, this can be done with other materials as well. For example, I know that there's meteorites that fall down, and if you want to get meteorite fragments, we'll also give you Paldeum fragments. You can actually go through and use your Anubis or somebody who can mining to do the same thing. And if you're looking for like trees, for example, early on, you can also do that same thing. If you had something like an Icondeer, if you threw him at the tree, he'll go through. You can actually go through and headbutt the tree. So if you're basically running low on some wood, and let's say your axe is broken, and you can't go through and chop down the wood, if you have a pal who has a lumbering ability, they'll actually go through and break it for you. And so this is also great, too, if you want to go through and set up basically to create a base early on, but you don't want to go through and basically pull all your pals out. You can actually use your party pals to help with different tasks, even when you're out exploring, or you don't have a fully functional base set up yet. Now, when it comes to repairing your gear, you do want to go through and be careful. So you can actually go through and select each individual item, and it will show you basically the materials you'll need to repair it. So, for example, this cleaver just needs ingots, wood, and stone. Nothing too crazy. But if you often come in here and you actually press the triangle button or whatever button that is for you to repair all, you want to be very careful, because you'll notice there are specific things that actually require ancient civilization parts. So in my specific case here, you'll notice that if I exit out here, that is going to be the crossbow, and that actually requires one, and then the other item is actually going to be my mega shield. So if you're constantly running out of ancient civilization parts and you're not sure where they're going, it's a good chance you're constantly spamming repair all, even if something gets kind of low. For example, this requires one, whether it was fully repaired or it basically lost 0 durability, or it's basically broken. It's going to cost a very similar amount, so you do want to go through and wait until basically the item is busted or being really, really close to broken prior to repairing it. That way you're not constantly wasting your parts. So be careful with going through using the repair all button, because sometimes you can quickly run out of ancient civilization parts, especially if you do it every time you come back to the base and you aren't paying attention. Alright, and now the next thing I actually want to talk about is condensing, which you can go through and do basically by using the Pal Condenser menu here. Now, you'll notice that if you want to use this, essentially what you're doing is you're going to go through and sacrifice certain pals to make the next one stronger. So, for example, if you look on the right-hand side, you notice that this Foxparks has a 1 star, and the rest of them do not have stars. So this is actually the one I've been upgrading, and so you would select them as the upgrade, and you can actually go through and use the rest of them to go through and sacrifice. You don't have to have the full amount. If you just only have 3 and you need 16, you can just do 3 for now. And when you go through and you actually sacrifice them, they will disappear. Now, you notice my boxes are a mess. So to make condensing the absolute easiest thing possible, you'll actually want to go over here first, and in your menu, go to the sort option, and then make sure you have by pal deck number. Sort it by that, and then you'll notice everything is going to basically be right next to each other. So all of the exact same pals will be organized and all put right next to each other, so you know exactly how much it is that you have. So, for example, I know I'm going to be going through using Vixie. Now, for Vixie, I have quite a few, and I actually do want to go through and condense Vixie, but there's a specific Vixie that I've already been upgrading. And so in order to identify that one, all I need to do is go through and look through all of these Vixies until I find the one that has 3 stars, or 2 stars. There it is. So it's this one here. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to select this specific Vixie, and then I'm going to go through and I'm going to select the rest of these ones, and then I can sacrifice all of them. So let's say you're continuously leveling one up, and then let's say you suddenly find one that you like significantly better. It's got better stats, it's got better passives, and you want to do that one instead. So instead of actually using this one as the primary, let's just say, for example, I liked this one more with no stars. And so when I click on this, you notice that I need 11 more to actually fulfill this. And you notice that this one here has 0, 4. It has 0 stars. I've never given this any other PAL essence. If I select these two, begin condensing, it'll just ask me if I want to proceed. Now, if I go back and I select it and I pick all 3, now I'm going to get a little red text pop-up. It says, you have chosen a high-rank PAL as an extract material. Are you really sure? And the reason it's going to show you that is because that specific PAL that I'm trying to condense already has a star ranking. Now, I don't quite know why it asks you that. Maybe it's because you've invested into it. Because what will actually happen is if you go back in here and you actually do it, we're going to sacrifice this pal. You notice how this one says I only have 2 out of 4. I'm only sacrificing 2 pals. But when I click on this third one, it actually counts as 6. And the reason for that is I've already gone through and condensed enough pals to put into it. So it's telling you that you are actually sacrificing that high level pal, but it's also including all the pals that pal has been given as a condensed pal. So you're not actually losing anything if you choose to change who you're adding these condenses to at a later point in time. So we're going to go through and do it. And now if you look at this one, for example, it has the 1 star. And if I want to condense, I now need 8 more. So if you decide that you want to condense one early on and then later on, again, you find something with better stats, don't feel like you're stuck with that specific pal. You can actually change it at any point in time and basically just go through and give them that boosted experience or condensing experience, if you will, through that other pal. Inside this church, they're all throughout the map here, but you're going to find different merchants. They look like this guy here. And they usually have different kinds of merchants. This one happens to be the metal merchant, and he'll go through and he'll tell you want to buy stuff or leave stuff. Some of these guys sell items, and some of these guys sell pals. Now, it's important on this item-specific guy, you'll notice he carries things, for example, this mysterious accessory box. And what this box is, do I happen to have them on me? I do. These are dog coins. And basically, you can go through and acquire dog coins by typically killing some of the different members of the people that you'll find out in the world. Or there are different scrapyard areas we can go through and pick up scrap. And they'll typically give you higher level balls, they'll give you gold, and they'll give you dog coins. And basically, you will use these to buy stuff from this guy here. And something you want to focus getting early on is actually going to be this mysterious accessory box. And then this is the exact same thing, but this one requires 1,000. And essentially what that is right here, you'll notice you have 2 accessories. You actually start with 1. So I've got a pendant that raises my health, and I've got a shirt that basically slightly raises my cold resistance. But I do have other ones back at the base that basically help with fire resistance and different things like that. And essentially when you buy this accessory from this guy, if you go to buy it, you can select it here, buy it here. Now it's sold out. So you can't buy more than one. The next upgrade is going to have to be this 1,000, so you will have to save up to get that. But when I open up my inventory, you'll now notice there is a 3rd slot that's unlocked that I have nothing that I can put there that's currently on me. But, for example, this necklace will raise my defense. Since my defense currently is 255, but if I go through and I equip this, it's now 280. So if you do find accessories like this, that's how you're going to be able to go through and buy more slots to be able to equip them, is you're going to look for those dog coins, basically, all throughout the map. And again, typically you'll find them from defeating other members that you'll find out and about, or in scrapyards, typically found out. Like I think there's a couple out here on this beach area, and then I know for sure they're all around the outside of the volcano. There's a whole bunch of them around out here too. Usually you'll find them also near like coastlines, and they're pretty easy to locate, but basically they're just scrap piles. They look like a chunk of metal that's broken, and then when you dig them up, you'll get those dog coins. Alright, now another thing for exploration is the Fangalope. This thing is insane. So you actually go through and you can unlock its saddle just up here, which is going to be at the level 26. It doesn't require too many things, nothing too crazy, 20 ingots being the most expensive thing. But the traversal on this creature is absolutely nuts. I would say, honestly, unless you have Jet Dragon, this is one of the best ways to go, as it's actually a creature that doesn't fly, but it has incredible speed. If you can notice, we're sprinting now. This is insane. And then on top of that, it has this insanely high jump. So if you want to clear a gap like this, for example, you can basically jump across the entire thing. I did whiff that one, of course, but I mean, you saw it. You got back up with ease. Like, it's nuts on the traversal on this. It is just an insane amount of fun to use. You don't have to worry about flying. And I always feel like you can enjoy games more while you're running around. If I wanted just to throw a ball at something, I may or may not catch it, but I mean, the jump is it's crazy. You can get from one point to the next extremely fast, and it's quite a bit faster than the majority of the flyers. I would say Jet Dragon, a few else might be the exception, but I just feel, again, being on the ground is more fun than flying over everything, because then you'll tend to lose a lot of the immersion, or even just things like chest. Having to descend can be quite a tedious process, or something that's a little bit slower. But just hopping around on this guy you could do everything. You could basically do almost everything that you could with the Jet Dragon and most of the flyers just while you're on the land, running around. And you can scale cliffs like this. I mean, if I walk over to this, it might take me a moment, right? And I've got to maybe hop up this one first, but I can hop up here, Hopefully land here. I mean, a cliff that is huge, right? That you wouldn't dream of doing with other creatures. You can just scale with the jumps. So if you don't have a Fanglope or you've never used one, I highly recommend you go through and get one. It is a whole lot of fun to use. All right, now the next thing is actually going to be elemental weaknesses. Do not ever take for granted different elements that you're using. So for example, against this Mamorest here, we're going to go through and throw out my Fanglope. And when you go through and watch him attack, he's going to use water. 6, 16, 53. We'll put him away. And so if we go to our party here, that's probably going to hurt. You look at him, basically his abilities are water and normal. Definitely don't want to be using that against, this grass guy over here. But then if we throw out the Bushi, watch how much this guy does. And I'm not going to use a special move. I don't want to show you that. I want you to watch just how much damage he does. The fire does significantly more damage than water. 1,200 damage. Bushi is already very strong, but the fact that he can go through it... Let's try and catch him too. Oh, wrong ball. That's all right. The fact that he can go through and deal basically double the damage the previous Pal did, and that's because you use something that's basically the opposite element, and then if you use something that's the right element, something they're weak against, not something they're strong against, you will do so much more damage. So it is really important to where you might have a favorite Pal you're constantly attached to, and if you're dealing with weaker enemies like this, you'll probably never even notice the difference. He's putting in significant work against these guys. But if you're facing something that's either stronger than you or at your current level, and you want to go through and basically be able to deal the highest amount of damage, or let's say you're facing a boss and you're struggling, really look for a good Pal that's going to be able to go through and help you fight those battles that are strong against the element you're looking to fight. And if you're kind of unsure of which element that is, figure out what element on the creature you're facing. So for example, you can just go over to your Pal deck here, and then let's say you didn't know, you can see all of their elements right here if you've ever caught them before. But then if you're still not sure, go over to your survival guide. And if you scroll down, you'll be able to eventually locate the... I may have passed it, didn't I? No, elements. And you'll be given the element tree, essentially showing you what is strong against what. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's kind of the conclusion of everybody who plays, that fire is technically going to be the very best element in the game. And that's the reason for that is because of this tree. It's basically saying that fire... strong against two different types. They're strong against grass types and ice types, whereas every other type in the game is only strong against one. So fire is strong against grass, grass is strong against ground, ground against electric, electric against water, water against fire, fire against ice, ice against dragon, dragon versus dark, and dark versus neutral. So if you have a fire type, you should always have a fire type on your team because it's going to guarantee you are strong against two different types of creatures. You do want to have some diversity, though, because you basically don't want to encounter something super strong and not be able to deal with it. All right, now this next one is not necessarily a tip, but something I highly recommend you do. And actually, in your Pal deck, take advantage of the information that it gives you, both in regards to the possible drops that it can give you. So if you're looking for specific things, like let's say, for example... let's go to bones on Vixie, or for example electric organs to craft certain saddles. If you don't know what gives those to you, go through all of the pals that you've actually gone through and captured, and it will tell you the different things that they go through and drop. But then it also tells you, their work suitability, what they're good at, and then it also gives you some dialogue too. So we'll go up here. This one's pretty funny. If you look at daydreams, for example, it says it puts those it's interested in to sleep and shows them an endless stream of happy dreams. Those who fall under its spell are never to wake until death takes them. That's pretty dark, and you wouldn't think that by just seeing these pals, but a lot of these things are either funny or simply just like dark. Another good one is if we go, I think it's up here. Where'd he go? Oh no, it's down below, I believe. Where did our little buddy go? Yeah, for example, Nightwing. It carries newborn pals to its nest and raises them as a surrogate parent. Once the baby pal is fattened up, it hunts them. So it raises kids, gets them fat, and then it eats them. All these things are pretty cruel or funny or hilarious. So if you haven't read through the descriptions, just take a moment to read them, and you might just appreciate your pal or hate the pal more. Honestly, depends. Another piece of information it tells you is if you haven't captured all 12, or if you have, it'll tell you in the bottom right-hand corner how many of that current pal you've caught. So if you need to catch more of them, for example, if you're like, okay, who do I not have all 12 of? Who should I be hunting down to go through and farm experience for? You'll know which pal it is. So for example, Cinemoth, it says only caught 4 of 12. Now that I know that information, I can then click on PlayStation, the R2 button to go to the habitat, and it specifically will show me where on the map I can locate this pal. So I could go through and hunt them down to try and achieve that 12 out of 12 and farm my experience. So I'm not wasting my time running all around the map looking. It tells me exactly where I need to go to find that specific pal. Alright, now I mentioned fighting bosses earlier and having the appropriate element type. But what if you don't have the appropriate element type? Can you still beat bosses? And the answer is yes, you can, but you want to be a bit more strategic. So for example, let's get this guy's attention. My crossbow does next to nothing to him, and I really don't have anything that's weak against either of his types, which is going to be electric or dragon, on me. So what I could go through and do is essentially, you do want to throw your pal out because it will immediately distract him. But what you want to do is, he's going to charge me and shoot his flame breath here in a second. So I'm going to let my guy attack, even though it doesn't do a lot. And I want to create some distance and be in different spots than him. Basically, I want to be on the opposite side of the pal of where they're fighting. Now, what you want to do, though, is you want to preserve your pal's health above all else. So if he's running at you, you just want to stay away from him so he doesn't damage you. But eventually, if he goes to attack your pal like now, he's going to go through and charge me or shoot at him. So whenever he does that, you want to dodge the moves. You just want to focus on staying alive. Now, if you're pal, we're going to move him. We basically went through and withdrew the pal to avoid the damage he would have taken from that move, and then throw him back out. And so anytime you see a big move coming through or you want to preserve their health, you want to go through and pull them back into the ball to basically save their health. So for example, I'll do the same thing. He didn't take any damage, and I can throw him back out. And so when you do this, you can negate a lot of the damage that they would go through and deal to you, and you can make the fight significantly easier, and you can make it to where 1 or 2 pals could definitely take down this guy. Now, I could certainly be assisting and shooting my crossbow. I only have 96 arrows, and I'm only doing 30-some damage per hit, which isn't a lot, but it does add up over time. So definitely go through, though, and make sure you take advantage of withdrawing your pal whenever you are in a boss fight. If you feel like it's going to go wrong, or you simply feel like you can't just beat them outright, this will give you a huge edge and allow you to go through and to beat them significantly sooner than you would previously if you didn't have that ability. That hurt. That was in my face. So basically, though, you need to stay alive, because if you die, everything is over. And then my pal actually took some damage there. But and then basically withdraw your pal to mitigate the damage whenever possible. If you have the right element, you probably never need to worry about this, because you'll probably just decimate them and take less damage from them as well. So not too big of a deal. But if you are finding with an element that is neutral to that other type, or you're simply just struggling, then go through and make sure you utilize this tactic. There is a small delay when you do throw them back out. They won't attack right away. But you can also use it too if the pal is getting too close to you. Let's say we withdraw our dragon over here. Wait for him to get over, right? He's going to shoot that lightning bolt down on us. When he gets close to us, let's dodge that. We're going to go through and throw our pal on that side over there, and hopefully he will turn around to attack our pal in just a moment, because our pal is actually going to be aggressive towards him, and he'll leave us alone. And there he is. So now he's going to go through and attack him instead of attacking us, and we can go back to basically dealing damage from this side and making sure we're staying safe. Now, if we do want to go through and catch him, the safest thing you can do is basically, my pal is getting low, mentions his danger here. We're going to be careful. I'm going to let him try and hit 1 or 2 more shots off, I think. We'll watch that health. He's not doing too much damage, so I'm not too worried. And I think that's probably a good amount. I don't want to risk it. So we're going to withdraw him, as he's still taking fire damage as well. And we're going to go through and hopefully throw him in here. That kind of hurt. They will still take the fire damage, though, so you do need to be very careful if you are using element types like that. And there we go. We captured ourselves a boss without losing any creatures, and he was relatively the similar level as we were. So that is a great way to go through and defeat bosses. Just make sure you utilize those tactics to stay safe and minimize the damage that the creatures you have actually take. Alright, well, this was a pretty long one. If you did manage to stick through here to the end, I do appreciate you. Thank you so much. And if you did enjoy the video, then please consider leaving a like and subscribing if you're not already.